Welcome back, everybody, to This Is My Bourbon podcast. I'm your host, Perry. I'm not flying solo this week, although the Whiskey Mutant is taking a week off. I am super happy to be welcoming to the show dear friend of This Is My Bourbon podcast, longtime supporter, just all-around great guy, Brian Beyke, Mr. Abandoned Bourbon himself. Brian, I'm so happy you're here, dude.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. You had me until the great guy part. I was riding with you until that one.
Is that the questionable portion of the
That's the
introduction?
questionable portion. Yeah.
Well, you're married and you've got kids, and they all seem pretty happy that you're you're in their life. So
that's right.
I'll chalk it up to a win as far as I'm concerned. But we wanted to build this episode off of a conversation that you and I have kind of been having intermittently over the past few weeks, but it's one that I think is like, I don't want to say controversial right now, but I do think that there is a level of like, people are grappling with what it means to be a bourbon enthusiast these days. So we're going to get to that. We are skipping Flying Blind and Sips and Snacks this week just because we're in different cities. It wasn't, it was kind of a time crunch getting everything together. But I'm going to be just sipping on some Turkey 101 until we get to our review. So, I mean, that's that's the thing that's in my glass. But I do have to ask you, Brian, of course, what have you been drinking recently?
Oh my gosh, what have I been drinking recently? That's a tough one. I drink a lot of different stuff all the time. I've been drinking a lot
way too off guard with this, dude.
Well, you did. I was trying to figure out exactly which way I want to go. There's one thing I was going to say, and I'm like, well, I don't want to frustrate people and be like, you pompous jerk, I can't drink that. So
Pride of Anderson County.
No. I'll go ahead and say it then. It's not Pride of Anderson. So here's the deal. Brian, this has no reflection on This Is My Bourbon podcast. I don't really like the Maker's Mark cellar aged. And so I keep coming back to this. 12, 13 times now. This is where the pitchforks come out and people turn off the podcast. I'm sorry, this is not sponsored by This Is My Bourbon podcast. This is just Brian Beyke. And I just don't get it, man. I just am not a big fan of it. And so I've been coming back to it in order to see, like, is it the day? Is it something I've had? And that's not the case. But what I have been drinking Old Route 8 a lot from Augusta.
I still have not had any yet. Oh, wait, no, that's not true. I've had it once. But I was pretty amazed with it the one time that I had it. But yeah, I mean, I'll still be happy to accept.
It's solid. My buddy Nick and I, we've gotten together on, I would probably say 4 different occasions with several different bottles just to do blinds to see, like, which one's our favorite today. And he had shared it with his wife. Awesome. She's kind of trying to figure out still what she likes, and she enjoys it. Kristen enjoys it. So it's just been good.
On the topic of Maker's Cellar Aged, we did review it a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And I mean, for anybody who hasn't listened to it, please go do so. But I was pretty let down by it as well. Mm-hmm. And I think I had a little bit of a sample left over that I shared with my dad this past weekend. He's a big Maker's Mark guy. And the consensus that I keep kind of coming back to is that it's just not different enough from Maker's cask strength to really be anything worth $150 a bottle. Like I would rather buy 4 bottles of cask strength than 1 bottle of cellar aged.
The thing that keeps wrecking me, I have 2 sides to this. One, so I went and they have an experience where, they take you around and then they let you try cellar aged, which for those who don't know, it is Maker's Mark. Once they talk about, like, they're all about when the product hits its flavor balance.
They
basically take it and they say, we're going to sit it and not let it age anymore in a cave. Hashtag not a cave. And it's a cave that they're legally not allowed to call a cave. They call a cellar, but hashtag not a cave. And
if you can't go spelunking in it, then it's not really a cave.
That's right. And they let it sit there until it's ready. But on the tour, I don't know if it was just a bad day for the person who was showing us, but they're like, well, here's the 12 and 13-year-old cellar aged. And this is a stupid 12-year-old barrel that's been aging in the rick house. And this isn't Makers. And you're going to try them side by side. And they're like, so the first one they give us is the not Makers. And they're like, so here, try this and let you know what you think. But it doesn't matter because this isn't Makers and it doesn't reach flavor balance and we'll never release it. What do you guys think? And I'm like, this is pretty good. And they're like, it's not Makers and it will never be Makers because it doesn't meet the flavor balance. I'm like, oh, that's a shame because it's pretty good. They're like, now try the cellar age. So I'm like, well, that's fine. But I like the other one. Like, well, it doesn't matter because that's never going to be Makers.
I don't understand that. I don't. Like, well, somebody told them the wrong thing.
They're like, well, it just tastes like everything else. It doesn't taste like Makers. And I can understand that argument, but that's what I like about it. It tastes oaky and well-aged. And sure, it's a little bit more tannic, so it doesn't meet flavor balance, but in their eyes, but I thought arguably it was better. But at the same time, here's the weird one. So the Bourbon Pursuit guys, they're across the hall. They got a sample in of William LaRue Weller. And so I was like, well, let me just do a little side-by-side because several of my friends who are big fans of cellar age, they're like, to me, this tastes like all the things I like about Weller. So I tasted Maker's Mark
I don't get that.
the other day, and I said, again, it just tastes like Maker's Mark. And then I tried the William LaRue Weller, and I went, hold on, this tastes the exact same. And I went back to the Makers, and I'm like, this is the exact same. And then I went to the Weller, and I'm like, this is the exact same. So if I taste the Makers on its own, it tastes like Makers. If I taste the William LaRue Weller on its own, it tastes pretty good. It tastes like, what I would expect from William LaRue Weller or cherries and chocolate and old age. But there's something about tasting them back and forth where I'm like, these are indistinguishable when I'm tasting them back and forth. I think maybe this year's William LaRue probably tastes like what you wished Makers would taste like. So, but given the taste back and forth, I'm like, okay, but that in of itself is a win for Maker's Mark Cellar Aged because when you're in the middle of some type of sipping, the flavor's indistinguishable. I just don't really care for it.
I wanted to like it so much more than I do, but yeah, it's just it's kind of, it's just not as interesting as it needs to be. It just is not, it doesn't pop the way that I think everybody talks like it does. But it's funny that you bring up, because we got a sample of the WLW as well, and we were much more favorable with that than we were the Maker's Cellar Aged.
I'd be curious for you to give a try. That I would love to hear your thoughts. If you do, just do a quick back and forth sometime. You don't have to do it now, but if you do, that'd be awesome. Because we've already lost half the listeners anyway.
Well,
so,
fair, yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
We bring you on and the numbers plummet. No, that's not true at all. I'll have to find another sample of the Cellar Aged because everything that we were running off of was just sourced from listeners. So
sure. If you get a chance, I'd just be curious to hear your thoughts on it. I was super surprised by that.
I'd really like to do that for sure. As far as what I've been drinking, on my live stream last night, I went through a bunch of samples that I had sitting around. One of them, which I was not prepared for, and I don't know who sent this to me, but it's a like one of the really fancy Courvoisier cognacs. It's like $1,000 a bottle.
Wow.
Or something. And I mean, they sent me an ounce of it, and it was, I'm not a particularly big cognac person, but I like cognac. I like Armagnac. And I was pretty stunned by it, especially for that, 80 proof distilled grape liquor, you know? I mean, I'm very happy with it. I'll keep saying it. If bourbon and rye suddenly disappeared, I would go to Armagnac in a heartbeat, you know?
Oh, yeah. I don't get to try enough cognacs and Armagnacs, but I always like when I do. I keep telling myself I don't want to get into another hop. I don't want another thing, you know what I mean, to add to it.
Yeah.
I'd rather just stick with bourbon. It's not even like it's the poor man's anything anymore. You know what I mean? It's expensive still. So, you know, for bourbon, that is. So it's like, I don't want to add another thing to it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But aside from that, managed to pick up a bottle of the Larceny C923 recently, and really been a big fan of that. That I think that Heaven Hill has finally figured out what they need to do with those barrel proof Larceny releases every year. They've kind of finally gotten themselves on the right path.
This is a hot take potentially, but like, so we're recording and people will, you know, it's getting close in the middle of November.
Yeah.
You know, I've been going back through the things that I have on my lists of like top things for the year and kind of placing those things. And then I think I was in conversation with somebody the other day, and it was just such a great comment. I don't think they meant it like in a mean way or anything like that. They were just like, yeah, some of these people, you know, they'll make these top lists, and I think they forget that people don't just drink bourbon that releases that year. Like he didn't mean it as a snooty comment or anything, but like, you know, I think about that too every year, and I'm like, man, that's a great, you know, as I reflect back and think about bottles that I love and still come to in 2018, 2019. I think sometimes it's interesting because we kind of get caught up in like, these are the bottles you need now. You can only drink these now. What do you mean you're not drinking something released in 2023 now? And someone's like, dude, I love this Joseph Magnus cigar blend that I got in 2020. Right. I'm still drinking it. You know, right. Just because it's not the year anymore doesn't mean they didn't produce. Doesn't mean those bottles weren't still good.
I don't disagree with that. I always just try to focus on what just came out this year. But I do appreciate people, because like Chad and Sarah at Bourbon Night, for a while, they might still be doing it. I don't remember. But when they do their when they've been doing their top 10 lists or top whatever lists, they'll throw in like, you know, regularly available bottles. Like, you know, Rare Breed did super well for a few years in a row, up against a lot of the, you know, more recent releases. But, you know, I don't think it's a bad idea by any means. It's just,
right.
I guess I like doing things the way I've been doing things.
Totally.
I also do not like change.
Yeah. When they mentioned it, I don't think there was any, again, there was no hate. There was no like dogging on anybody. It was interesting perspective, because every year I'm one of those people who are like, what's been great this year? What's been whatever? And I'm like, oh, that's right. Like, if you're not hyper focused on this, if you're just a consumer, if you just love listening to people talk about, like, you might not care. So it's interesting sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bourbon enthusiasts are silly. We're silly sometimes.
We're a difficult and confusing breed of people, I would say, and that's what we're getting into on this week's episode is. In 2023 and beyond, as we are coming to a close on this year, what does it mean? What does it look like to be a bourbon enthusiast nowadays? Because we're having perspectives come to light from people like Bourbon Pursuit saying the daily drinker is dead. And then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we have this increase of ultra premium offerings that are coming about that, you know, 5-10 years ago, people were not as willing to spend that kind of money on.
Right.
And so I think maybe first we ask ourselves, well, what does it even really mean to be a bourbon enthusiast at all? Is it somebody who does have a daily drinker, or they're waiting in line at Total Wine for the next big drops? Or what does that, just in general, how do the two of us view the idea of a bourbon enthusiast?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it's fairly safe that everyone listening to this podcast is a bourbon enthusiast, but no. I remember I'm born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky. I lived outside of it for about, I don't remember, 11 or 13 years before moving back up in 2016. And I was not big on bourbon. And a year or so into that, I was like, hey, I probably should get into bourbon. And I had a buddy who I knew because we had musical interests, and I sold him a coffee grinder. And he was coming through Louisville, and we met up. I don't remember if that's, he met up, and he was coming with his wife and was hitting distilleries and hitting stores for whiskey. And I didn't know what it was. We shared Blade and Bow on the back patio of the spot that I worked at. And I remember being like, wow, this is cool. This is interesting. I wonder if there's other bourbons I would like. And I went to Total Wine and I picked one up. I got a Woodford double oaked, So I was, at that time, I would say I was learning to get into whiskey, but I was not a bourbon enthusiast. Whereas my buddy, who had made this trip from South Carolina to hit some places up, he's hit bourbon enthusiast. So now I got to figure out where the definition then begins in the middle of that. Right. What is it that would create that definition that now they're enthusiast? Is it because I don't think it's that they have more than 10 whiskey. I think people can just enjoy whiskey and have a collection. I don't think it's that. I think it's, I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that it ranges anywhere from people are aware that you like bourbon and are a frequent consumer of it, all the way up to bourbon is my personality. And by that I mean like the people who eat, sleep, pray, love, the whole 9 yards, Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. Not even Kentucky purely, right. But like that is their thing. That's the same way that people are with golf, same way people are with model trains, all across the board. I think that it's the people who have really adopted it and adapted it into their person, for better or worse. But I think that on the opposite end of the spectrum, even if you're like the guy who is known for, well, when we go out, Steve gets, Taylor Small Batch neat or whatever, or Buffalo Trace, just, something people more readily know. Buffalo Trace neat. And, sometimes he'll go crazy and he'll get Turkey 101 and a High Life on the side, and that's his, but like he's the bourbon guy of the group. So I think that there's that. And this guy is also like, I don't mean to just, pigeonhole it as a guy. But this person is also open to trying new bourbons, and they're curious about how it's made, and they're curious about, the way that it interacts with them. They have a deeper kind of understanding and connection to it that, say, somebody who is just drinking bourbon to get drunk doesn't have. Like there's I think that's the distinguishing factor as well. There's more of an appreciation for it as opposed to just a straight up like, this is my vice, this is what I use to relax and stop feeling the bad feelings that I feel during the day.
I like it when you mention too that it like becomes just a little bit more of the person. That doesn't have to go crazy, but like, I got one friend that he works in an industry where he's probably gifted, he's gifted bourbon probably, that just seems like the gift to give in this particular industry. So he's got a bunch of bourbon and he'll bring it up and I think he like appreciates it, but I don't think he really, it's like he enjoys some. He doesn't probably think about it all that much.
Yeah.
And he's got several bottles, I wouldn't call him an enthusiast. He probably enjoys it. So it's like, yeah, you gotta suck a little bit of that inside and say, oh, I've got once you start getting the intrigue, then you're probably, growing into enthusiast.
Yeah. So in I think you take that like inception point and then it goes off in all these different directions. The guy who's the collector, the guy who is making content, the guy who, like I said, he's at every release and it's his personality and, but then we dial it back now. And I think this is just kind of like, I hesitate rather, to like apply that definition 100% of the way across the board. I'm not trying to say this is like gospel or anything, but I do think that we can kind of largely agree on like, that's a fair definition of what being a bourbon enthusiast means, right?
Yep.
But then again, we dial back and we start looking at the discourse right now around who bourbon enthusiasts are and the way that they engage with the spirit too. So I'll ask you this, as far as like the wider bourbon enthusiast community, I guess, what do you see that's changed the most over the past 5-10 years?
In the industry itself, or with the enthusiasts, or
I would say more specifically with enthusiasts.
I think before 5 years ago, if somebody was a bourbon enthusiast and they bought a bottle, they more than likely had plans to open it and consume it. And I think nowadays, a bourbon enthusiast would probably be more speculated as somebody now in potentially interchangeable with tater that people use all the time, right? I think a lot of enthusiasts now, because the industry has exploded, I think that people think that there's so much coming out that they have to quell the enthusiasm, that their acquisition could be higher than their potential to drink. And not that hasn't been the case a long time ago. I just think if somebody went and they Shelford Weller, they would drink Shelford Weller. If they got, BTAC when it was readily available or easily gotten from the store, they most likely planned to drink it because it had accessibility. The lack of accessibility met with people's increasing enthusiasm, I think has impacted a lot of hoarding and over collecting. Even if they weren't planning to be the collector. I know a lot of people who don't seem to be the collector, but there's a cool pick coming out, or my buddy said this was good, or I was on the bourbon trail, and they still amass things that that they don't probably intend to get to, or their palate they end up developing it more than what level it is of acquisition or something like that.
So to me, that sounds like there has now become a distinct divide between purposeful bourbon collecting or intentional bourbon collecting and passive bourbon hoarding. I think that we in an age where everybody is so connected as well, and information is so easily accessible, and I think, like, for me at least, thinking about the bourbon enthusiasts being more and more informed as time goes by with more accessibility to information. The looser this definition of enthusiasm becomes. The guy who can't stop talking about it, the person who's, constantly on their phone looking at unicorn auctions or whatever. Like it's just taken so many different forms nowadays that it is kind of hard to pin down exactly what we mean when we say bourbon enthusiast. But I like that we are also taking the time to like have this conversation.
Well, and here's something, let me say this too, because regardless of what direction we go with this podcast, this hits, and I think you'll appreciate on what kind of sparked the inception of this podcast a little bit. Here's what's interesting. There's also a downside about people like you and I on this podcast right now talking about this, because you and I are still very, very similar in specific to being on this podcast. You and I both are in a space where we obviously both have nice microphones in front of us. We're no stranger to talking about whiskey. We're in Kentucky. We're familiar with newer releases, and I appreciate some of the influencers online when they have like the after conversation things, because the voice I feel like you don't often get to hear is like someone in Montana, someone in Minnesota, wherever it is, and they're like, I always hear people who have access to all the things telling me about all the things, and that's not necessarily my perspective. And like being an enthusiast is different for me because I don't have access to X, Y, and Z, or people whose budgets are different. And this is no knock on us, but like I appreciate. I wish that we had more people on this topic with us, because I'd love to hear more people define enthusiasm and access for them, because I think that we're going to nail some really interesting things, but I wish that there was a broader understanding to get things, because there are other times when a gaggle of people will still get together and it will seem like there's a lot of differing voices. But like I mentioned, leading this statement off, they're actually more similar, I would say, than different. And that's all I'll say for right now.
Yeah, we'll peel back the curtain more and more as time goes on. When you, Brian, look at your understanding personally of your enthusiasm for bourbon and for the bourbon market, how much of that enthusiasm do you feel like has been maintained throughout the years? And I mean specifically like, that kind of like homeostasis level of like, I'm really enjoying what's happening right now. Bourbon's great. The community's cool. Like I got access to all of these, scaling back to like that access comment as well. There's still so many things that we can get pretty easily, even though we're not getting like the allocated releases as more commonly as some people would be led to believe we do in Kentucky. We just don't. But like, do you have a baseline for that anymore? Has that goalpost shifted along the way as well?
I don't think it's shifted all that much. If anything, I feel like, I've tried to just kind of learn the things that I like. The biggest thing, and it hits a little bit on what I mentioned before. Sometimes I think about whether or not I'd be able to be, if I would still be a bourbon enthusiast if I didn't live where I live. Like, I think being in Kentucky and having access to the stuff that we do here is like, it's been a huge privilege. It's been great to be able to access or go to a distiller to try something when it releases, or a bar, they might have it at an affordable price. Like, I don't know that I would be the level that I was if I wasn't in the circumstances and in the place that I am. And so I often think, if I were to be out of this, and that's why I mentioned that thing about folks who aren't in those kind of microcosms. It's like, if I had moved somewhere, how would my ability to keep up with the bourbon industry and the things that I like, how would that be able to be maintained? I don't know. I mean, except for like having a ton of stuff that you just continue to like drink down. That's like stuff that you like.
Right.
There's like that side of it. But in terms of like going back to keeping up and keeping in the know, it would be I would feel like it'd be a lot more difficult.
It is, I think, more tiresome nowadays to keep up.
So much.
Because there is so much. I mean, I think it's another argument in favor of people like Dave Jennings, who did find so much love and a niche market for just talking about one brand with Turkey 101, or excuse me, Wild Turkey and the Rare Bird 101 brand as it is now. Because I mean, that is a brand now too. I mean, it's crazy that he's been able to establish all that, but it is, to me, like, I think it is easier to say, well, I'm only going to focus on the new Jim Beam releases, or only the mainstream releases, or you take the alternate route and you go, I'm just going to do craft stuff. Like, that's a super important part of this as well too, that I think people are more quick to dismiss or overlook at times. But, you know, you being somebody who works with Sealbox too, I mean, surely there's a level of enthusiasm that has been changed or shifted with what you have more like access to, I suppose, but also just exposure to as well.
Totally. Yeah. And it's, you know, it's something I didn't think that I would appreciate. I didn't know that I'd appreciate it as much as I do. But then even, you know, I have a buddy who was super diehard turkey fan, right? And before actually the limited products started to come out really, you know, at a rapid pace seemingly, and the price is higher. So, you know, he kind of got out and got into craft, and I always thought that was so interesting, so weird. And I think he was just like, well, the prices to get old turkey, like vintage turkey, I can't keep up with that. And it's getting allocated now, and it's these limited releases, and now they're jacking up the price. Like, he chose a good time. I don't necessarily know that what he's going to get is going to be as comparable, but enjoyability, yeah, for sure. And that's why this isn't exactly the question that you were hitting on, but, you know, my hope always is that we can help people find what they like, regardless of what that is, because if you find what you like, sometimes you don't need to keep up with all the stuff. Or if you do, you can help filter it out to say, well, that sounds interesting and it'd be cool to try that sometime, but does it align with what I like? And that's why I think the people that you listen to for their opinions, like, I try and do a lot of research to figure out who aligns with what I like, because there are so many voices and they're trying so many things. But when you can cut through and say, there's a couple that I trust for these reasons, it'll be a lot easier for you, regardless of whether you have access to something or not, to say, well, is that something that I should actually have FOMO over, instead of thinking everything that I should, when there's so much released that it's like you will die if you try and acquire everything that's being thrown at us these days.
Yeah. I want to go a little bit inside baseball on that point.
Yep.
As well. Because I have done a bad job. I will just admit, I've done a bad job of keeping up with people whose palates I do relate to or find value in, because I'm doing so much of that legwork now.
Yeah.
That I like kind of not selfishly, but just kind of like boastfully. And it's not even exactly that. It's just this notion of like, well, I trust my palate.
For
right?
Sure.
I understand.
It's one of the only things you can trust, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like being, and kind of just resigning myself to, well, I know what I like. Mm-hmm. And to some degree, and you know, I'm not saying that this is 100% true. I know that there are people who definitely disagree with me. I'm not saying it's entirely accurate either, but like in my limited scope, I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of like what is good too, right?
Oh,
I've been doing this for 6 years. I've developed my palate. People can go back to the first few episodes, even first like 100 episodes, and see, how things have changed since then, because they have. But I do admittedly need to spend more time being less of a bourbon influencer, even though I don't really consider myself that, and scaling it back to more of like, and I'm constantly trying to like work on that and trying to find what made things, what sparked it all in the beginning anyway. And trying to rest on some more of those like enthusiasm parts of the bourbon brain, I guess.
Yeah, going back to even what you said about trusting your own palate, it could even be so brand specific. Like I'm a huge Four Roses fan, but Four Roses is a tricky brand because they have a bunch of different recipes, and even in that, I can't even just take another Four Roses enthusiast's opinion on a barrel as like, oh, I should like that, because I have one guy and I'm like, we couldn't be further apart. Like he likes the younger, the zippy, sugary ones. I'm like, no, I like the oak stuff. But going back to the point too about it's not where you landed, but where you had started off with that conversation. Like take ADHD Whiskey, for example. Like I don't have time very much to watch all of his content, but for my personal palate, I feel as if he and I align pretty closely at how we rate. And so I appreciate his ratings. I actually keep a running list of bottles that I'm interested in hearing his thoughts are and what he scores them. And I usually put it on there and go, well, daggone, like he's pretty right on. Like I think that it's better than these bottles, but not as good as these bottles as well. And having that palate that I trust is helpful, because like if there's something I haven't tried, it's good to say, well, I really liked Heaven Hill 17, but he scored that up here, and he put this one like all the way in the 7s. Like, okay, well, if it wasn't at least an 8, like maybe I don't, he aligns with us on Maker's Mark. I think he had the Makers like in the 7s for the cellar aged. Wow. And again, I'm not saying that I'm not saying that way, but that I think that there are people who would say that about you and why they listen to the podcast too, right? There are people who
of course,
trust your all's opinion too. Yeah. And I'm just always thankful that people would have folks that they're like, hey, if I needed to get opinions, I trust what they're going to say about these sorts of things, and that eventually people would learn to develop their own on an enthusiasm level, to not just take the words and actually not just say, I would like this, so I'm buying it for my shelf. I would like this, so I'm putting it in my collection. But they say, I'm getting this because it will align with what I want, and I'm ready for something else, and it does meet that. So,
you know what I also am so cautious of now, because I do know that I'm susceptible, to like, if say Chad and Sarah get a sample of something before I have the chance to try it. I typically do align pretty well with what It's Bourbon Night says in their reviews. My problem too is that if I listen to, or if I watch reviews, tasting notes, comments about a product before I myself actually get to try it, I wind up parroting a lot of what I've already heard. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's better to just kind of go in without, because I don't really read tasting notes anymore either, because I don't until I'm done, until I've finished a review, until I've gone through it, put it through all its paces. Just because it's more important to me to take that time with it and really get to know it and get to understand it and be excited about it, or not, or, you know, find all of the flaws within my own little like controlled environment. You know, and then I'll go and I'll watch other reviews or listen to other reviews. Like,
sure.
I'm trying to think of one. I'll tell you one too. I as much like adoration for and respect as I give to Fred Minnick, who, you know, in so many ways has been a mentor to me over the past however many years. I don't align with his palate on a lot of things. There was one particular release. I think it might have been an Elijah Craig Barrel Proof release where I was all jazzed about it and I was so happy, and I went and like watched his review and he was like, "This just isn't it." And I was like, "What do you mean? This isn't it?" But like, you know, it all just goes to saying, you know, my journey as a bourbon enthusiast is so much different. And even outside of like the podcasting side of things, being a content creator within the bourbon verse, the bourbon sphere, is such a different animal from just being a consumer or just being a collector. Those two things, while they do, there is an overlap on that Venn diagram. I'd say 9 times out of 10. The focus is so different, and this is very in the weeds. I feel like, but like, I guess the core of what I'm trying to get at is just that my journey as a bourbon enthusiast has taken so many different twists and turns and dips and dives and rises over the past 6 years that, yeah, I do trust my palate. I do try to rely more on my own experience, but I also have to remind myself there's a community behind this as well. And the community really is what got me as excited about being a bourbon enthusiast as the spirit itself did.
Yeah, you weren't heading this direction, but, you know, an influencer with the type of content that's going out right now, I feel like is like one of the most dangerous grounds to be in, because one, brands know that it's cheap to get you a product, to get you to advertise for them. And so you got tons of that out there, which may or may not have misinformation, but not a lot of people do a good enough job to clarify that. And then the type of content that's going on out there is, you know, frankly, it's a lot of stupid filler content, given how little time that we really have and like how much stuff's going on out there that it's like what we kind of want to like just veg out on. But like, of all the time that we could have for productive trying to figure out things that we like, we go to things that like they're just sometimes I feel like a lot of waste, and I feel like just adds more confusion to trying to figure out what you like as an enthusiast. And in a lot of ways too, does create a separation with community. Not always, but a lot of times can.
I think it's important to bring up as well two things in particular. One, bourbon influencing. It and I mean, this is the same with anything, but it doesn't exist without the enthusiasm that people have for it in the first place, right? I mean, you look at somebody like, and I'm not calling him out specifically because of the shift that his content has taken over the past couple of years, but I do think that it's a good case study at the very least for how symbiotic this relationship between bourbon consumers and bourbon influencers is. But like Bruzel on YouTube, his content was largely focused on just the wider alcohol industry, right? Beer, vodka, other spirits. And then, bourbon's taking off. And so he shifted to bourbon content. And people are still jazzed about bourbon right now. And so they latch on to what he's doing. And because he sees that they're latching on to him, he's doing more bourbon content. And it's just this cycle that keeps perpetuating itself that I think, too, is so indicative of the thing that I keep going back to about distilleries and distributors and companies that have stock or stakeholders in bourbon. They see the trends. They see where people are putting their money, and then they chase after that as well. They go after it. And so our energy gets diverted so much or diluted so much because there are so many different brands now, or brands that have been around for a long time, legacy brands that are now doing insane new releases, insane new labels, and charging $400 or $500 for it. Yeah. And it's a very, it exists so much within a vacuum that if one thing leaks, the whole thing wouldn't exist at all. Right? So I think it's important just to notice too that and to kind of accept, we have a lot of enthusiasm as creators, as content creators, as influencers, whatever you want to call us. We have so much energy and excitement and enthusiasm and care and love for this spirit that we want to see it thrive and survive. Right. And so it goes beyond, I think, the constant barrage of single barrels or the debate over what is a daily drinker anymore. Right. Do we want to go into the daily drinker thing?
I mean, we can.
I say we do.
You're driving this bus.
I'm not trying to
I'm just hanging out the window.
I'm not trying to this is not out of a sense of trying to start anything or cause bad blood, but the impetus I think for this conversation between the two of us was the Bourbon Roundtable from a few weeks ago, where Bourbon Pursuit posed the question, is the daily drinker dead? And I just don't think it is. I don't think it is. I've spoken for a really long time. I want to give you the chance to respond to some things as well.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I have anything specifically to respond to with your, closing up that thought, necessarily. It's just interesting time. Everything's interesting right now. But I have thoughts on where you were going. If we do just want to keep going.
Let's just keep going, man. Let's keep going for it.
So there's no bad blood kind of going into this conversation. But one of the things that you and I mainly discussed, and I'm sure we'll keep elaborating as we go out, but it actually, the core of what we were discussing was actually less about the topic in general. It was more so, I think I called you up and say, hey, I've got an idea for a name of a podcast.
Yeah, you did.
Which was, I actually don't remember the name of it. If you do, then you could jump in with it. But it was basically, if you are so far removed from the enjoyment, or as we started this podcast, the bourbon enthusiast side of things, if you have shifted a position in the industry and you no longer have the passion, the enjoyment of it, does that have implications on how present your voice should be when discussing topics such as, is the daily drinker dead? Because, again, you and I are talking about this mainly now. While I do work with a brand that's in the industry, I feel like my thought process on this is, as somebody who wants to hear other people have discussions like this, if it's someone who is not regularly still curious about what producers are doing or what these new releases are doing, and not purely from a P&L level, a case volume level. I'm talking like, I still hunt. I still like to go after bourbon. If the only whiskey I try is because whiskey is sent to me, can I speak on behalf of, can I speak on the topic of, is the daily drinker dead? That was kind of where we came from. And, I don't, my answer to this is probably different than yours on the daily drinker side of things anyway, because I'm an explorative drinker. I am with coffee. I am with bourbon. And like, I don't have a daily drinker because I personally like to hop around. But yeah, I will pass it back to you if you want to keep going, and then we could just keep chatting about it.
So
you're like, Brian, I wanted you to talk more, so I didn't have to have the mic back.
It's not that. I'm trying to figure out how I want to approach this, because I do come at this, I think, with one of the more middle of the, not that like my opinion is mid, but just like a more middle of the road point of view, because to me, a big part of the way that I engage with my own content is still being an experiential bourbon drinker, right? So, and it's not to say that I'm like taking every weekend and going to distilleries and doing their tours or seeing what they've got on the shelf, buying their holiday bottles or whatever. It's just like, if my relationship with bourbon begins and ends with me sitting in the chair in front of a microphone, then I personally think that I have done myself a disservice in being able to speak about the broader audience of bourbon consumers.
You could talk about it from a logistical standpoint, as a matter of fact, as things that you like from what you've seen within the industry. But what you're saying is being able to relate to somebody on a personal enthusiasm level when it's just bare bones, like doing the grind, doing the job.
Yeah. And somebody asked Fred a couple of years ago at this point on one of his live streams, what gets you excited for new bourbon releases or about bourbon anymore? And it always kind of like made me sad, his response, which was, I just don't. He's like, I just don't get excited about it anymore, because he gets excited about family stuff. He gets excited about, seeing his kids and home life and working on himself. And like, I'm not saying
that's not bad. Like,
no, that's not a bad thing at all.
Great.
It's wonderful. And I agree with that as well. I mean, I'm spending a weekend away from my wife and daughter, and it's killing me, every second that I don't get to see them. But like, I don't know if like that distinction needs to be made. And maybe it's just maybe maybe it's just like an energy well thing. Like, how much energy do you have in a particular pool that you can pull from, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe I am spreading myself too thin. I probably am. Working a full-time job and doing the podcast and being a husband and being a dad. Like, you know, but at the same time, it doesn't take away my excitement for new products, for the thrill of the hunt, or just getting to try anything new. Like I'm one of those people too, where to me, the opportunity to be able to try something is almost more valuable than getting to own a bottle of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, and that's not to say that I don't still have those bottles where I put them up on the shelf and I go, wow, look at that. I got.
No, we
that
all do.
bottle.
I mean, I got some.
Yeah, exactly. Too. Exactly. It happens, but it just is like, I derive so much enjoyment from sharing and having those experiences with other people that it's not just a like new release thing, but I do get excited about new releases, and I do get excited about like, how's it going to fit into my broader understanding of bourbon. And you know, did I love Maker's Cellar Aged? No. But that doesn't mean that I don't find appreciation for how that slots into my understanding of who I am as a bourbon drinker. Right.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that
exactly
you don't like it. You know what I mean? So and like, I think two things that kind of came out of, you know, in us bringing up that topic was like, well, if you've gotten to a place where like you just don't drink if you don't have to. Now, for health reasons, I understand that. But if you don't because you're like, I don't need to. I don't
enjoy it. I don't want to.
Yeah, if you don't enjoy it, it's work for you, then it's like, does that affect your ability to be an enthusiast? And then the second part of that was, if you haven't liked anything that you have had in a reasonable amount of time, like, one, that stinks. Like, why even do that? But then two, I'm not saying that there is a lifetime that's like, I haven't found anything that reminds me of X again, therefore I am no longer, you know, and considered an enthusiast. But it's like, I mean, come on, really? If you haven't found something, like not a single pour you've had in 2 years is good, you're still hanging on a 2010 something release, or like, you know, an old gold bottle Pappy or something, and being like, just whiskey just sucks these days, like that. Are you a bourbon enthusiast?
Do we need to step back for a second and clarify that this is not a direct criticism of Bourbon Pursuit?
Oh, no,
because I just want to say that, like,
no. This is not a single person thing. This is a general thing. Like, yeah. I've talked with other people too, and you know, even kind of one of the things I mentioned earlier, like, I feel like some of my thoughts sometimes can teeter on it, because sometimes I could think to myself, man, if I were to think about something that's been a trend or something that's interesting. You know, I think that releases of my top favorite pours in 2019, I enjoyed more of my favorites then than what are on my list the last couple of years. Like, sure. There are a couple of bottles that are awesome and a lot of just things that I'd be like are just fine. Maybe I'm heading in the direction that we're talking about right now.
But
maybe not. But there are people who are just like, nah, man. Again, yeah, no, not specific to any person, but sometimes there are people who are like, just whiskey, you know, just not good anymore. And be like, oh, well, I don't know, like, why try, or like, what that sucks. Now, it is still true that things taste different now, and trends are here now that they weren't before. You got to put Ambarana in everything. You got to, you know, wine cask this. You got to whatever, like, it's all the same mash bill from the same place, or it's all young. Like, I get the reasons as to why someone would say it's different than before.
Yeah.
That's not exactly what we're hitting at. It's just like, man, if you just aren't a fan,
yeah, then
how does that play into the way that you talk with other enthusiasts about things that are currently happening in the industry? I think that's what
Yeah, and I think what part of what you are getting at too is there's an opportunity for exploration that we are kind of given with all of these different brands right now too.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me speaks to, if you do go through those processes of I tried all these brands and I don't like them compared to the stuff that got me excited about bourbon in the first place. I'm not saying that stuff, like you said, it does taste different now than it used to, but Knob Creek Small Batch is still pound for pound an incredible bourbon. Turkey 101 is still a really solid, incredible bourbon. There are all of these little pockets and nooks and crannies that you can look at from the perspective of, well, I tried all this. I got into this really because I liked XYZ. Even though I didn't like ABC, I can still go back to XYZ and know that I am going to find comfort and reliability within that.
Yeah,
and
I think I'm more talking like if someone who doesn't even go, they don't like ABC and they just don't go back to XYZ.
Yeah,
they just would rather just talk about how bad ABC is. You know what I mean?
And that to me is like, you're not even a bourbon enthusiast at that point. You're a bourbon critic. You know, and you're not doing it because you love it. You're doing it because it's fun for you to talk about how much you hate everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're getting at, kind of, right? Yeah. And like, I don't think that the daily drinker is dead. I don't. I think that people have favorites that they fall back on.
Yeah.
I think they have bottles that they are replenishing outside of their collection. Maybe it's on your bar cart or it's on your kitchen counter or whatever. But, when that bottle's gone, you're like, oh, I need to go restock.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like that speaks to people's enthusiasm, even if it is just for a bottle. It's still something that you go back to because you love it and you are excited about it. And, you want to share it with other people too. And, that's how you get some of those like, well, what's your daily drinker? It's old Bardstown Bottled and Bond. You're like, what, dude? What? Like, just giving other people the chance to learn and, bringing bourbon back down to an accessible commodity, something that is very easy to obtain. And that's, there's still so many cheaply priced bourbons out there, but I don't know, it's tough to argue for, expansion of brands and increase of prices when, there are still some really solid products out there.
Yeah. And honestly, I feel like we're seeing, a little bit of a shift. I would even say it seems like the market right now is headed either towards, there's a split, there's like a hole that's happening. I think a year or two ago, I would say that people are buying in this hole. And now I actually feel like we're getting away from this hole. There was a price like $100 bottle or something like that. It's like, hey, there's like this kind of market for stuff that's right in here. Like you got to get above your threshold and then like things are good. And like now I feel like there's a lot that's in that. But I feel like I'm seeing people go either more towards the daily drinker type of pour or the crazy prices on things that we're seeing now. There's a lot that's still sitting in this middle, but I feel like people shy away from buying in that middle now in favor of the two extremes.
But But it doesn't. They're not mutually exclusive though. Like what the existence of one doesn't mean that the other cancels it out. You know, or is canceled out. And
yeah, I mean, the fact if people are pulling towards the two extremes, all the more reason why they would have one for the other. Because I'm not going to take a $250 Blue Run or William Heavenhill and make batched old fashions with it, or like. There's certain applications I'm just not going to use certain things for. And if that middle central area is actually starting to dissolve a little bit for people buying more of the Shelford dailies again and this, then they're going to say, this is my, I got home from work and I don't give an F. And then like this is when friends are here, or it's something special, or it's the weekend. Yeah. And this is not backed up by data. This is not saying, hey, this is metrics that I've pulled and like, so I'm saying something like this. This is not that. I'm just saying like in my own Brian Beyke observations, I feel like I'm seeing that. I feel like I'm seeing a pull away from single barrels a little bit. And instead it's like, why instead of buying 10 single barrels, don't I buy something crazy and a bottle and know that I can plan on a couple of backups in my budget for when that runs out to keep chugging. Not chugging in terms of like just chugging,
I mean do what you want through. But yeah.
That's right.
Be healthy. Be responsible.
Right. That's right.
This is all to say, and I think that, at least within the scope of TIMBP, the past like month has been a little tumultuous, right? Mm-hmm. We've made some big comments about some private releases that ruffled some feathers. I don't ever want to be so removed from, being excited about bourbon. Mm-hmm. That I'm so cynical all the time, because I'm not. Like, I don't find value in constant cynicism. Mm-hmm. It's tedious and takes too much energy out of you. Same reason I don't like holding grudges. Like,
look, I'm not cynical. I just think that there's a certain group of people who can't call themselves a bourbon enthusiast anymore. Okay, no, my argument, I think, just leans more towards that definition is constantly evolving and gets murkier and murkier. Mm-hmm. The more the broader that this spectrum gets. And I know that what we're kind of landing on is not having actually answered the question, what is a bourbon enthusiast now? But I do think that allowing for it to kind of exist on its own and to, be more amorphous than just, one take or another, that's not a bad thing. Yeah, and honestly,
I genuinely don't think it is.
I'd love to hear feedback from the listeners of the show. Please. Too. Like, getting back to what I said early on, like I don't think it can be defined by just you and me in the capacity that we are. I'd love to continue to build what other people's thoughts are on that. Like as using multiple voices from multiple different areas, We'll do it. Given the fact that if they all listen to the podcast, they're still a little bit focused, but that's okay.
I think that look, the listeners of This Is My Bourbon podcast are very evolved, deep thinking, and empathetic human beings. I will say that. That's my that's my takeaway. But yeah, you and I should do a follow up to this as well in the future, just with some outside perspectives and thoughts and opinions as well. Yeah. But we were trying to figure out A, if and B, what we were going to do a review on for this episode. And I kind of wanted to play towards your Four Roses guy strengths, your leanings initially, and then you brought up Small Batch Select, which I've not done a critical look at since it came out in 2021. So we're going to do kind of a revisit of sorts of Four Roses Small Batch Select this episode. You first of all, I do really appreciate you being like the Four Roses guy.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah,
there are a ton of people who know a lot more about me, but I'll take a title. I don't mind. I feel a slight bit of disadvantage. Like I to be completely transparent, I have not had a lot of the single barrels, which is normally what I drink this year. So I feel a little bit of disconnect from the pick program right now and what the trends of things are, at present, but that's okay. That's not what we're talking about today.
Price has gone up. I think that's
it has.
the most important thing that you need to know right now about single barrel picks from Four Roses. But you had to make a stop to grab this bottle as well on the way over to the studio.
Yeah, I made a different stop than I planned to. So my bottle, Four Roses has a pretty special connection for me. So I would take my dad to a lot of Four Roses events, and it was a brand that I really enjoyed. We went to the event together when Small Batch Select released, and we got a picture. I don't have it obviously to show on here. We got a picture together. He passed away recently, and so I always usually drink Small Batch Select, and in honor of him, or like whenever those things come up. But Four Roses just in general, by no part of anything that they've done has just it wasn't really a product that he drank, but there were very limited times that I felt like we had something together, and Four Roses has been a part of that. And so this bottle, the last time I shared this bottle was with a bunch of his old veteran friends that me and my mom went and shared some bottles with them last year in town. And so the bottle's at her house. So I was going out to drive to get that and realized I left all my microphone stuff at the house. So then I was just on with some of my bar guys, like, hey, do you have this on the bar? Can I buy a pour? And do you have a bottle I can put it in? And so I had to shift to that and actually go downtown to Merle's Whiskey Kitchen. Shout out to Merle's Whiskey Kitchen. If you're in Louisville, Kentucky, it's one of my favorite places to eat, but they have an awesome bourbon selection. That's where I got a sample of it so that I wasn't late for the podcast.
Well, I actually had not had a bottle of this for a minute, and so I just went out and grabbed one last night at Liquor Barn. I think it's still consistently been about the same price. I don't think that it's really fluctuated too much, but $55, I believe.
Yeah. And so, one of the things that I thought was interesting about this is lately, SLB Bourbon Bar, if anyone is into the bourbon YouTube stuff, I'm pretty sure they recently did one where they did they compared this to the most recent LE. I'm a big fan of their limited releases, but they were kind of taking it from the perspective of, hey, this is more readily available and this is not. How do you, I love the way that they just so easily do some of those breakdowns down to earth. And when you and I were talking about this, you loved this bourbon when it came out. I won't speak for you, but it's cool because it has some things that play into what we are talking about in terms of enthusiasm and not everyone having the same accessibility to something. But here is a product that in the markets that it is in is usually readily available. And what some people would say is like a limited edition-esque flavor in a readily available package.
And, you were saying too that on that review, people were getting a little bit up in arms because there was that comparison between the LE and the Small Batch Select. And they're like, well, why would you even bring up the LE? I never going to be able to try that or get that.
Right. And even if I could, I wouldn't spend the money on it. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I know where a bottle is in Lexington for $300 if you want it, but
yes, I do. Yes, I do.
This year's LE is one of my favorite Four Roses products I've ever had.
Well, then you take it. But
I can't afford that right now. That's the.
If you don't, I will. It's two. My video, I thought I did a great video on it. By the way, check it out, abandonbourbon. But I love it. Now I will admit, Four Roses in general to me always sucks in blinds. Like I know people who are like blind it, like get the real result, and I'm like, man, Four Roses. It's got to be a guilty pleasure for me then, because it usually doesn't fare well. LEs, single barrels, whatever, they don't fare well in blinds, even though high rye products like MGPs do. But the 2019 Four Roses is like one of my favorite bottles of all time, and this one has a lot of things that I like about that.
Here, okay, I'll ask you this then: is the age of doing blind reviews dead?
Oh, dude, I don't think so. I think blinds.
I don't think so either.
Blinds are so great, and the thing is, like, if anything, blinds, like, I think blinds are so fun. I think they're eye opening. I think that people should always have grace, because there's no right or wrong answer. You are allowed to like different things different times. You know what I mean? I think some people are like, oh, gotcha moments, and we can always post things like that, but it's like, a blind is a blind, and whatever you like that day, and sometimes something could be off, and I think blinds are super fun, and they're humbling, man. They really are.
Yeah. So 6 and 7 year old Four Roses, VKNF yeast strains, both mash bills. So 6 different individual whiskeys that go into the blend of small batch select. I think
arguably my favorite recipes. VK.
Oh, really?
F.
Okay. Yeah. I'm big on O. I'm a big O guy.
Mm-hmm.
That did. Yeah. Anyway,
I'm a big O guy.
I'm a big O guy.
Yeah, I've tried with the O's. That just they just don't hit my style all that much. I'm
sure.
V's and K's I'm all about.
F's I do love V's. Yeah. I've never. So we went through and did the 10 recipe tasting kit as well. A couple months ago at this point. And really, I mean, I'd never had the chance to do that. We reviewed the this year's LE on that same episode too. So it gave us a nice little perspective to bounce off of with all that. But yeah, I'd never been able to sit down and do all 10 recipes in a row, but very eye-opening, I would say. I think we were the most sour on Q and K. I think Q and K were our 2 least favorites.
E's or V's, do you know? Or did it not matter?
It didn't matter. We struggled with
wild, man.
Yeah, we struggled with both of the mash bills. But it's funny how, even though, I mean, this doesn't have my favorite recipe in it, how much I just love this product. It's so accessible. I do think that it is such a great showcase of how insanely well Four Roses, despite all of its different mash bills, or excuse me, all of its different recipes, can be so harmonious within itself.
Like as someone who regularly drinks roses, I find myself sometimes in different pockets. There's sometimes where I'll taste them and I'm like, oh my gosh, do you notice the nuance? Like this one's got, these have so much more vanilla, or these are more floral, or these, oh yeah, they're more robust. And then I'll go through phases where I'm like, dude, I'm too close, and they all just taste like Four Roses.
Sure, yeah.
Like I could try to pull, if I just pull back a little bit, I'm like, nope, like that. I'm hyper focused, but it just tastes like Four Roses. But yeah, I mean, people hate to use the term sometimes, balanced and smooth, but for as spicy as they can be because of the rye content, they're pretty dang smooth for what they are also.
So, taking into consideration that argument of this is the like LE adjacent pour or bottle from Four Roses.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it does that for people? Do you think that it scratches that itch enough to where if you're like looking for something a little bit more, maybe not rare is the right word, but a little bit, more limited edition, does this kind of do it for you? Do you think it does it for other people as well?
So it's still proofed down. It's 104 proof, but it's very rich. And so I know some people that, even 104 proof sounds like a lot. Yep. So I think it drinks big like what you would want, but is still relatively low. So for people who think limited usually means cask strength, I don't think they're going to taste this and be like, this doesn't taste cask strength to me. Like, it's pretty full. And then when I think about products that are, like when I think about limited products, I did this the other day. The other day we had, what was the pour? I think we had the new Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. And then, what was it? I think I was thinking, we had Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, and then we had like Michter's 10. And Michter's 10 is a lot lower proof, but I think I just started to put it in my head. This is not justification for any distillery. I'm not saying that, but like I realize that some products that are in a more accessible price point, because they're in an accessible price point, they usually are allowed to have rougher edges.
Sure.
There might not be imbalanced in what a lot of people may not be able to taste when you get into an LE is usually refinement. Mm-hmm. That's very hard to describe. And I'm not trying to say that in a pompous way, but like, I think from a couple of side-by-side tastings of things I've done, or like William Heaven Hill, for example, it's like one of my favorite product lines that Heaven Hill does. And there's usually just a refinement to those that you don't notice in the brashness of Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. Or, there's a brashness to the younger Beam products that they've refined a bit in even these Hardin's Creek, things that they've put out. And it's hard to put a dollar amount to somebody, whether refinement matters to them, if the flavor tastes pretty much the same. So That's going back to this pour. Often when I think about refinement of a pour, though, usually it has a really good finish, a really long, satisfying finish, and it does have a touch more maturity. I still find that this pour has spice and some heat, but I think it hits into some of the barrel char that I love about Four Roses, older Four Roses, and has a really long, pleasing finish. So I think people get an experience more akin to what they would think they would get in an LE, even if it maybe doesn't have the maturity that I would hope for in something that I would prefer to drink. Or other LEs like the Four Roses LE will choose to also lean on depth and complexity that comes from age being added to it. You lose the age, but I think you get almost every other piece of it. Like one of the things that I love about this nose is really creamy, and it reminds me of like a donut shop, which that reminds me when I first tried the 130th. Now, whether I said this during the earlier call or I said this on this one, my buddy who shared that Blade and Bow with me, he had come to town and we went and we camped out for the 130th release of Four Roses. And so I have very fond memories of 130th, 2018 release. And that was one that I remember being like, dude, this smells like glazed donuts and just tastes like kind of oaky vanilla caramel bomb. And this to me, I've always said, this is like the Stag Junior of the Four Roses 130th. It kind of has those sweet pastry shop, not pastry, but like sweet pastry shop or like donut shop, like notes on the nose that kind of just draw me in really right away.
Yeah. I think what I was going to get at was thinking about like the subjectivity of age and whether or not age truly is like a factor to be considered with limited edition products. Mm-hmm. Like if you can achieve that same kind of experience with younger product, even though, 6 and 7 year old is not incredibly young. It's younger than, a lot of some of these batched products that we're seeing on the market. But does age really hold as much weight as it used to for people?
I will say, I like the concept of age, but I have learned that it does not define things. I have tried some incredible young Tennessee barrels that are killer these days. However, because of what we said earlier, with there being so much, I could easily just say there's as many Tennessee barrels that suck. I could easily say there's as many Kentucky barrels that, so like, I think it's depending on what perspective you're in or what's on your mind, you might be like, ugh. So I kind of throw it out the window. And that's again, another reason why I think blinds are fun. Like I'll try and put young stuff against old stuff. And I'm also a big believer. It's not exactly neck pour, but like I'm a big believer that something has to sit in a glass if you can get it there, like conversation is perfect for bourbon because it can just sit in the glass. Yeah. And I would much rather come to a pour in a glass at least 15 minutes after it's been sitting in there. I just think it's just usually better. Like even right now, sure, I've had a couple of sips, so my palate's a little bit more acclimated to this flavor. But when I was first sipping, and I was like, man, there's like some orange zest, there's some heat to it. But now, it's not as hot, and I just noticed that it has more of the like kind of char, lighter oak notes, not as intense as the older ones, but I can pull up on those notes more because I feel like I've let it sit in the glass more. And if you do that with your pours, another reason why age doesn't matter all that much.
I forgot that's how that conversation started.
Sorry. I talk so much. That was the bad part about having me on a podcast. And I feel like nowadays too, sometimes I find it difficult to pull apart what is oaky versus what tastes like barrel char, and whether or not I enjoy one versus the other. Like there's some younger products that I try, and I'm like, I can't exactly call it oaky as if it's like something that's old, but it tastes like wood, and it's kind of toasty, and it doesn't taste young, and I like that. Yeah. And it's a characteristic that I think young bourbon can pick up that can get a lot of the flavors that you would enjoy, like an old bourbon would, without the tannic potential.
I want to go back to the initial impression that I kind of had about this in 2021 and naming it my best bourbon of the year. And my takes are not definitive, but I like this kind of like circular nature of this, especially now that having this conversation about this in indirect correlation with the LE. Why I was so floored by having a new addition to an already storied brand. Mm-hmm. And why was it really 2021?
I mean, so the only reason
had to have been 2019.
The only reason I said 2021 is, which doesn't sound right to me. The only reason is because when I looked just to see if I had notes for this already, so if I did small batch select, I have this under my list of top available bourbons of 2021. So no, that doesn't exactly mean it came out in 2021, but on this list I have top rare whiskeys of 2021, top 10 picks of 2021, my top 10 available bourbons of 2021. So I think I just deduced that maybe it was 2021 because of that.
It was 2019.
Wow. Why is it on my list? That's probably just when I decided to put on a list because it's an available product in Kentucky.
Yeah. Well, reasoning, the way that I was kind of working back through it in my head was because I interviewed. I haven't done a whole lot of like on-site interviews since COVID. And I interviewed Brent Elliott on site at Four Roses. And one of the things that I brought up was the small batch select and how it was like the fourth rose, or, you know, whatever they were kind of calling it in brand speak at that time. And I was like, well, I didn't interview him in 2021. It had to have been earlier than that because, you know, I was doing so much more on-site work. Pretty good. Anyway, so in 2019, this was added to their full lineup, and I think I was so taken aback by the fact that it did have that feeling of being very rich and bold and refined, but at a readily available kind of price point. And then it wasn't going anywhere. Like it was a permanent addition to their brand. Putting this in perspective, especially with, you know, this conversation in 2023, I think this does really give me the like kind of final understanding of what I was kind of trying to say back then, that yeah, it does have LE flair to it, but in a much more accessible package, you know, more available.
And definitely price point.
Oh, 100%. I mean, $55 for this, it almost feels like a steal, honestly, especially when you consider how many 4 and 5 year old bourbons out there go for $80, $90, $120. But, you know, that's the benefit we have with, you know, a legacy brand like Four Roses, that they are able to, you know, they're making enough money. They don't have to like put something out with a huge sticker shock or anything that, you know, makes you really think twice about it. But this still, I mean, I find just so much love and value in this bottle. And it's, you know, one of those that I just need to have, around more often than not. But I looking back, trying to see when it did come out, I realized that we have actually reviewed this twice on the show with the lens of like our rating system. So I don't know. I don't want to go through the whole nose, palate, finish price of it all, because it's exhausting to me, especially having done it twice before. But this is just kind of reiterating that, you know, there is great bourbon out there to be found that isn't $400 or $500. But, you know, if you do spend kind of in that mid-tier price range, you are going to find something that can satisfy so many different wants and needs as a bourbon drinker. And I just, you know, this is such an excellent, well-rounded product out there.
Oh yeah. I mean, I can't get either. I feel like I keep pouring it and it still has like a barrel char or like oaky funk to it that like, it's great. I mean, it's like a grounding thing that's just,
I like it.
I like it.
I like it a lot.
It's solid. I mean, and even, to be fair, and this is not meant to dig on other brands, but there are other brands that put out LEs that aren't as good as this.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we've spent enough time being serious and dour on this episode that we're going to move into some of the fun parts of of the Semi Bourbon podcast. We're going to start off by moving into Barrel Rings. It's our call-in segment of the show where you can leave us a voicemail or send us a text message by hitting up 859-428-8253. Listen to the voicemail on the show, or we'll read your text out on the show as well. But we got one this week from our recurring Barrel Rings champion, I would say, Mr. Bill Robarge.
What's going on, boys? I'm just sitting here watching Perry's live. I was reminded I needed to call in for my Barrel Rings this week, so I did it here while I'm watching you guys. So how exciting. Just wanted to say hi, see how you guys were doing. I am unfortunately having a medical procedure tomorrow, so I was no drinking tonight, but I plan on having a little bit tomorrow. So let me know, should I be opening something new? Should I grab a sample, or should I just pull an open bottle? Anyways, hopefully you guys are doing great. Yeah, enjoy the weekend. I'm going to go to Driftless Glen and get me their new American single malt. Excited for it. All right, boys. Have a good one. Peace out.
I did not know that Driftless Glen had a new single malt coming out.
No, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I'm here for the ASMs, man.
Bill, I hope that you that everything went well with your procedure today. But I would say open you something. Open something. If you've been holding on to something special, whether it's a sample or something new, I would say now's as good a time as ever. Especially if any medical procedure, like even if it's just light anesthesia, is still like so nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
And I mean things can go wrong as well. So little victories. You got through. Hopefully you got through it. I haven't heard from you today, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed until I have confirmation. What's your take on that though, Brian?
Dude, I kind of think it depends on the procedure, and I don't need to know what it is, but like if you're all hopped up on something, please drink water.
Well, true.
If you're but also,
it was penis reduction. That's what he was getting.
Well, in that case, grab your favorite vodka seltzer and celebrate. This is coming from someone who very much enjoys vodka seltzer. So no, man, there's always a reason to pop something that you have been waiting to pop.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely
do it.
We've kind of done a whole episode of high proof hot takes, so we'll skip that this week and move on to tips and bits. It's our segment where we recommend something for you to watch, listen to, read, just enjoy, something that we've been going through and spending our leisure time with over the past week or so. But what kind of tips and bits might you have for people this week, Brian?
Oh man, you passed it over to me first.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, why don't you
okay.
take it first?
Well, the newest season of Loki wrapped up last night. Don't know if you're a Marvel guy at all, but it is easily the best thing that Marvel has done in probably about 2 years, which is sad to say from a multi-billion-dollar franchise that it's taken them a solid two cycles around the sun to figure out what they're doing with their content. But yeah, Loki was incredibly engaging and just so moving, and it was one of those moments where I was just kind of like, oh, this is not just a Marvel product. It's got merit outside of that as well. I think they did a fantastic job with it, and I highly recommend it, especially if you saw the first season, just to get closure on a lot of these characters that we were introduced to. I've been playing the last two DLC courses for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on the Switch. It came out this week, so I've been playing a lot of Mario Kart.
I played some new characters, but my kids love playing the battles, and so
nice.
Whenever a new DLC comes out, I never get to actually do anything because they don't want to race, and so I'm like, can we please stop with
I just want to race
the stars and can I just race a new course? Here, let me ask you some insider information, ma'am.
Yes.
In older versions of Mario Kart, it was Yoshi on the mock bike, and I was just cruising and crushing races. And I know they mixed up with like the different like heavies and lights and like car and bike combos and whatever. Like,
right.
What do you race? Like, what is what have you found to just like be crushing it?
All right. So my go-to is Metal Mario. I go with the I think it's called like City Bike or something like that. It's black with flames.
Mm-hmm.
I just use the general like parachute for the glider. And then it's a red wheel. I don't remember exact. I think it's called Roller, actually.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I found, acceleration is more important than speed.
Interesting.
On these games, because the higher your acceleration, the more quickly, like if you're going around corners, if you're drifting around corners, you have a better like release. Even when you're doing those, like when you're tapping R on the controller as you're going over like a jump or anything, coming out of that, you have a better speed boost as well. But as long as there's like a good balance between weight and handling, and then a higher acceleration than speed, that is typically where I find more. I cannot believe I'm talking about this like it's real racing, but I'm going to do it anyway. I've spent so much time playing Mario Kart 8.
Well, so what I did was, last night I played as Funky Kong for the first time, and I used I used a different car than I normally do because I don't actually even recognize it as a car that's available to me when I normally drive, and I forget what letter it is, but when you're racing, and then whatever the button is, that's the lower button from where you're racing. I don't know if it's Y or what it is. Like you press X to drive, and Y is right below it. So it's the 4-button pad, right?
Yeah.
And so you're pressing whatever button it is to go, and then if you push your thumb on the lower one too, you'll take super tight turns. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Oh my gosh!
Oh, okay.
Dude, I live and breathe by it. Hold on, let me look up Nintendo Switch controller real quick just to get what this is. So you're on the so you accelerate by the A button, right? And then if you have the A button and you hold the B button, you make these like quick like whip around turns.
Really?
So whatever car I was in, I have to go back and do it. Whatever car I was in with Funky Kong yesterday, I found myself, I could like press it and let go of it, and I would be doing huge, like almost 360 turns. So I would turn more than I planned it. And so I'm like, well, there's something with the handling or the acceleration that's like way different than any car I used to drive, because it is just whipping me around so much. But it's crazy, great, especially in battles, because like if I go past somebody, I do the A-B thing, and then you just go flip and you're going the other way. You gotta try it when you're racing.
Oh, I'm definitely gonna do that after we're done. I was gonna say too that I had been wearing down the Joy-Cons. I don't know if you can see it super well, but it's gotten to the point where the rubber has broken through, like past where the actual control stick is. So I had to order a pair of replacement Joy-Cons yesterday, and these are going to be my backup. But I really enjoying the DLC courses for Mario Kart 8. But it's crazy that it's basically over now. That's like
I can't believe the waves have finished.
Yeah, the end of an era. So just going to keep playing Mario Kart for a while. What about you, man? What do you have to recommend?
So this is a deep dig. I had listened to this before, but one of the podcasts I had listened to before called Reply All. It's by Gimlet Media. There's an episode that I just in context. I was driving with a buddy last week, and he kept getting. They're not scam calls, but he kept getting these calls come into him, and every time he picked up the phone, he would interact with them differently. Like he'd be like, "No, I'm not interested. Hang up," and he'd be like, "Oh, like, where are you from?" He's like, "Really? I'm from there." But like, he'd like leave, and then, "No, I'm not interested." Hang up. And then one that like, so anyway, and I was like, dude, I remember this whole podcast about a scam call. And so the episode is 102. It's called Long Distance. It's from the podcast Reply All.
Okay.
And this guy had gotten like a scam call, and he was just really interested in digging up the story about it. And so he records all of these interactions that he has with the scam caller. And I'm telling you, it is like, it's really interesting to listen to. It's really interesting. So
I'll definitely have to check it out.
Definitely just something to peg into if you got some time to burn.
Yeah. I've been trying to spend more time recently just listening to more podcasts again. Not that I like stopped, but it's so easy to like get on YouTube and it's, just pop on different videos. But podcasting is such a wonderful medium. Not to toot my own horn or pat myself on the back or anything, but I enjoy it. I like it quite a bit.
Absolutely,
Brian. Thank you so much, man, for being a part of this episode.
Hey, thanks for having me. This has been a blast.
Yeah, dude. This is a conversation, of course, that is ongoing. Like we said earlier, please let us know what your thoughts and feelings are on this. You can hit us both up on social media at abandonbourbon or at my bourbon pod, and we'll be happy to chat with you and reply there. Is there anything else you want to plug before we get out of here?
Dude, not necessarily, but at Abandon Bourbon on the socials. If you are interested in asking about various whiskeys or whatever, feel free to reach out to me. You can always browse things at Sealbox, which I believe is drinksealbox.com, which I feel like I should know, and I do not know that. But if you do any editing of this, then I can definitely look that up. No, I am wrong. That is at sealbox.com. So, the focus there is on craft whiskeys, but increasingly in a time where there are things that are getting too expensive, too difficult to comb through, or legacy brands are putting out expensive stuff. Not that those aren't good. It can be hard to decipher. So if you're ever curious about something that's popping out from a distillery you know very little about, let me know. I might be able to go through my notes, or maybe it's something I've had through here, or if you're in the area, maybe it's something you could try.
I think, I don't remember if you had said this on the pregame chats or if you had said this early in the episode, but as we were talking, the email for the 4-gate releases did come through. So almost like clockwork.
Absolutely.
But yeah, go check those out. And you can also check out our Patreon, which is patreon.com/mybourbonpodcast. That's how you support the show for as little as $1 a month. At $5 a month, there's bonus content over there, which includes the pregame chats, which comes out before every episode that Brian was a part of this week. You want to hear a little bit more in depth on what he has been doing with his personal and work life. He gets into quite a bit of that, takes a deep dive. And that's just the best way to support the show, other than telling your friends about it, sharing around episodes. If you have questions or comments, you can send them to thisinmybourbonshop@gmail.com. You can find all of our apparel and merchandise at bourbonshop.threadless.com. Get yourself a This Is My Bourbon Podcast t-shirt if you so want. And leave us a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app of choice. See most of them, and we'll read them out here on the show as well. I think that does it for this week, though. Brian, again, thank you so much, man.
Absolutely. So glad to be here.
It's been good. We'll see y'all real soon. But until then, I'm Perry.
I'm Brian.
And this is My Bourbon Podcast.